for having us. We're going to start with a short film. After that, I will introduce my guest, and then there will be a short conversation with His Excellency, Mr. Shhade, and after that, we go to the conversation on the panel. Can we start with the film, please? So a lot to cover, obviously. I'm going to start by introducing my guests. To my right, Minister Kamal Shhade, Minister of State for Technology and Artificial Intelligence and Minister of the Displaced. Next to him, Dr. Laura Joy Boulos, Assistant Professor at the Faculty of Humanities at St. Joseph University. And to my left, Stephen Feldstein, Senior Fellow at Democracy, Conflict and Governance Program at Carnegie. And joining us online is Ankit Panda, Stanton Senior Fellow and also Nuclear Policy Program at Carnegie. Artificial intelligence is often introduced to us as efficiency and innovation. And as a journalist in my newsroom, I see firsthand how much AI is being useful. It's allowing us very fast investigation, very efficient analysis of huge data sets, giving us access to tools and access to information in absolutely unprecedented ways. But I also know from experience, like everybody else, that technology rarely comes or never comes within a political vacuum. And in the absence of regulation, oversight, and accountability, AI can become blurry, and in a lot of cases, it can become scary. And in a region like ours, marked by weak institutions, unresolved conflict, and deep power asymmetries, AI doesn't simply improve systems. It amplifies existing power structures, whether in surveillance, security, labor markets, information itself, and eventually what it does to us as individuals. So the question today is not whether AI will shape the future. It already has, and it already is. But the real questions are who controls it, who governs it, who benefits from it, and who pays the price when it's deployed without safeguards. I'd like to start by grounding this conversation in Lebanon and then widen the lens to the global forces reshaping power, security, and rights in the AI era. Your Excellency, I want to start with you. And we finally have a Ministry of Artificial Intelligence. When you look at AI, not just as efficiency, also as infrastructure that concentrates power through data and automation, how ready is Lebanon really for that?
Thank you very much, Alia. This is probably the toughest question, because when you talk about Lebanon, you have to differentiate between public and private. You have to differentiate the private and academia. In terms of our talent, we're more than ready. There's a lot to do. We're ready. When it comes to the hard infrastructure, which is generating enough power, because without producing the megawatts and the gigawatts of power, there will be no data centers, at least within our jurisdiction. That infrastructure, the hard infrastructure, be it the data centers and power generation, or the telecom networks that carry this information, they're not there yet. However, in terms of soft infrastructure, what we have today is an academic community that is not just vibrant, it's almost on the leading edge of what happens in academia. They don't have the research funds, but they're able to do incredible things. And that goes back to the talent. But we do have also missing pieces of the soft infrastructure. The most important one is the fuel that actually powers artificial intelligence, and that's the data sets. So no government before this government has actually put some thought into how do we start building the databases that will not only make a difference in this AI race, and I have my views on that because frankly, this is overhyped, the race, but how do we improve the services that we offer? How do we use technology so that we have a better performing economy? How do we deliver better services to citizens? How do we cut out the middleman that's actually been taxing people every step of the way in dealing with the government services? So those are questions that, or the answer to which can be made available within a relatively short period of time. But in the medium to long term, you're going to have to fix the power generation and the telecom network. Now, good news, it takes you no more than 2 years to get all the power that you need to produce. We can fix that in 2 years. We can fix a telecom network within 6 months. 6 months, no more. Building data sets will take months, but that's something that we can invest. But the most important thing is talent and this ecosystem that we have, which will take any other country 100 years to replicate. So we have something to work with. That's our...
Let me interrupt you there, Mr. Shahade. In a country that old-fashioned electricity is controversial, like not even guaranteed, you use the term race. How relevant is that for Lebanon, realistically speaking? How do we position Lebanon, again, based on priorities? And how would you, if you had your magic wand, what should come first? What comes before what?
So clearly, you cannot wait till all the pieces are in place. You cannot. Every minute, every day counts, because we are in a race against time, if not in a race with other people in other countries. To be more specific, there's nothing that there's nothing that justifies delaying putting in place the right institutions, the right laws to protect data privacy, to set up a cybersecurity institute, to have a cyber strategy for the country and implement it. Those things can be done. You don't need to have the data centers and the power production locally to do that. So there's a lot that we can do, and I cannot justify delaying an investment in this area as public sector as well as private sector when the benefits are so great, be it in healthcare, be it in the creator economy. Every single area of the Lebanese economy where we have excelled is an area that today is being disrupted by technology, digital technology more generally, and AI specifically. If we want to maintain a semblance of leadership, we're going to have to embrace technology. Now, what do you do in the meantime when we don't have the power and the data centers? And that's where, frankly, my opinion goes against the logic of the vendors who've shaped the equipment vendors who've shaped the debate. They've convinced every single country that you need to have your own infrastructure in country before you start thinking about AI. I mean, it makes sense to have it. I'm not saying we shouldn't. But in the meantime, I can have agreements with countries with whom I have very good relations as government to government, set up data embassies, which means I use the data centers in countries that we have good relations with, that we trust. And in the data embassy, Lebanese laws will apply. And this means that you could have a healthcare data set, a healthcare AI engine, training the models even on foreign soil.
Are there examples to other countries that are doing that without the proper
Today, the
infrastructure?
model of a data embassy is prevalent. Countries like the UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia have set up these data embassies for about 25 countries. And so we can, at one point, we have the choice to make. We either join the race or we say, you know what, I'm going to wait till all the stars are aligned. That is a prescription for procrastination. Difficult to say. Prescription for procrastination. That's what it is. Okay? And I think that we can do this kind of thing, this kind of investment in our relations. The laws will apply. What we need to do is focus on building the institutions that continue to build the talent. And you may have seen, I've focused on bringing the big tech companies back to Lebanon. Oracle, Microsoft, Google, within the next 6 months, they will all be doing business again here. And that is something that we have been waiting for. Not that they're the only ones that drive technology, but you cannot get into the technology race without these partners.
I'm going to get to that, but you just mentioned building institutions, and I would agree with you. Talent is probably the most important. Having the human asset is probably the most important. This political will is also a thing. Is there alignment in Lebanon today vis-a-vis moving forward? You know, yesterday there was a piece of information that went viral, labeling Lebanon or the dumbest city, Beirut, the dumbest city in the Arab world. And getting out of there, I mean, I don't know how fair that is, but getting out of there requires alignment and political will. Do you think that is available right now?
So the political will and putting your purse where your will is, they're two different things. And so,
having a purse
so what I take away from this, sorry?
And having a purse.
And having a purse, not an empty one, you're right. I cannot say that the political will is 100% there. I think we're at 50%. But 9 months
What
ago,
are the biggest
9 months
challenges?
ago, we started at zero.
What, in your opinion, is the biggest challenge?
I think, look, even within the government, we have two very conflicting views. One view is a gradualist view that says, you know what, اشتري له computer, buy a laptop, place it in the office, teach someone to type on the computer, and maybe this will improve. Or in one room, have the Ministry of Economy, Ministry of Industry, Ministry of Justice representatives physically provide a service that they now provide, within 1 kilometer as the crow flies, but about 2 hours of driving, okay? Now, this logic, I think, is still very present. And what it means is, let's make do with what we have rather than the position that I and some other ministers advocate, which is, look, technology today has changed, revolutionized the way governments do business and deliver services. We have a budget constraint. We also have a civil sector, a civil servants, a body of civil servants that is depleted. 7,500 out of 27,000, 28,000 on the books. So what do? Do you start hiring people again, or you re-engineer the process and start by saying, so what is the service that I'm supposed to deliver? Some services that the government delivers should be eliminated. We're the country that is the most over-regulated, and I say that with pain because I'm a liberal at heart. And we have a government and a parliament that over-legislates and a population that does not respect the laws. And these are two extremes. We over-legislate, and we're probably the country that disregards the laws the most. And I think the two are related. When parliament regulates by law, every single step, every single process, you cannot change it, you cannot evolve. You're stuck with it for 50, 60, 70, 80 years. Now, the logic that I come from is to say, what are the services that we need to keep as a government to provide, and eliminate those that are not important? And that can be done in, a quick exercise, 6 months tops. And the second question is, those services that we have to deliver, what do we keep and how do we deliver them? I would start with technology today. Why do you need to have building permits submitted to a Lijni because nobody trusts anybody else, when today with AI, it can review whether your building permit application is actually compliant? 80% of the applications can be reviewed by AI without human intervention, without the risk of arbitrary intervention. Now, which choice would I take? I'm clearly with the choice of leapfrogging. using the latest technology. Now, that's an easy thing to say, maybe because I'm not a politician and I'm not going to be a politician, but this is how we change the way we deliver services as a government. And I think that's what I owe everyone who is around me, working with me, and that's what I owe for the public office that I hold. We have to change things and use the latest technology. Now, with these two choices, I can tell you, again, depending on who I talk to, there are different people in the government of different minds. Give you an example, mechanics, تسجيل السيارات, car registration. It could be changed and made digital in record time. There are reasons why it takes time. There's no political will yet to change these things. So, yes, the political will is better than it used to be, but we're still at 50%. We need to get to 100.
Well, I know that we could talk for hours about this, because also it's going.
That's what my wife says.
Too efficient is going to lead to laying off a huge part of the public sector, which that by itself could be.
That's the myth. That's a myth. The public sector in Lebanon is, as I said, 7,500. We had the Civil Service Board and OMSAR go through, and they were asked to chip away at those positions that are not needed. They came back with 2,500 positions to be eliminated out of 27,000. Now, mind you, those numbers date back to the design of these ministries that goes back to the 50s and 60s. The latest two ministries are industry in 73 or 71, and then there was, anyway. So effectively, there are 60, 70 years old, the design, the org chart with a number of civil servants. How relevant are they for the 21st century? Clearly not relevant, okay? That's the kind of timid approach. So when this was presented, it's like, I'm sorry, this is unacceptable. We are able to make do with 7,500, so we should be able to improve, at least get rid of half those positions that exist purely on paper. Now, will AI eliminate civil service jobs? I don't think in our situation that's a problem. Will it eliminate jobs at the global, at the national level economically? The debate goes on. You have seen some jobs being eliminated, but many other jobs created.
We could talk again about this a lot, but I will have just a few minutes left, and I want to ask you about the Oracle contract. We agree, I think everybody agrees that training within the public sector would be a great plus, but also the choice of Oracle, which probably is going to be with every technology company, but it raised eyebrows. In a lot of ways also very legitimate, given the security situation in Lebanon, given how much technology has been used in the last Israeli war on Lebanon. These are not things we can undermine. So what's your take
Thank
on
you for
that?
asking this question, because it gives me an opportunity to, if you will, pop a few falsehoods. One, this is not for the public sector only. We never said it was for the public sector. We said it's for the whole country, number one. Number two, it is not a requirement for the public sector. Whoever decides, if they decide to adopt this technology or the other, that's a choice of the ministry itself or the department that's using it. The myth that has been propagated is that somehow there's a kind of sweetheart deal. This is a training program to re-engage with big tech. Oracle is the first. More to follow next week on the 23rd. There's another big announcement, and there will be over the next few weeks. I mentioned big tech is coming back to, and they're not doing this now because they love us. They're doing it because this market has opened up again for business, and they're saying we want to claim a piece of it. So if Microsoft, Google, Oracle, SAP, they're all welcome to come and join and start training people. No obligation. It's not like they train you to use Oracle and then they put an implant in your head bought from Neuralink and they, manipulate you from a distance. This kind of nonsense is akhbar newspaper, complete falsehoods. I'm sorry, I have to address it, and then various other, news outlets picked it up and repeated it. And you know who also is promoting it? It's people who actually sell another software and don't like Oracle. Yani, let's face it.
بس كمان your excellency كمان يعني there is a lack of trust and there is a lot
I understand there's a lack
of
of trust.
obscurity at that level.
And
How does
I take that very seriously. The job
the
of the
regulation?
government is to regulate by providing for data privacy and data protection and cybersecurity.
And is this being done?
No, yes, this is being done. The legislation is there. Just next week, I think, or the week after, the Minister of Justice and I will present to the Council of Ministers a new law on data privacy. A new law because since 2017, we've had a sham of a law that doesn't protect your data privacy. So yeah, we have to do this, and we're doing it from scratch. Now, does this mean that the Oracle deal somehow by itself has put our data in danger? There is no data exchange. Contrary to what some news outlets claimed, there is no data exchange, okay? Can I be clearer than that? Now, there are companies, some sitting here in this room, that have chosen to work with Oracle. Our job is not to stop them from working with Oracle. If the question is Oracle a company that should be on the list, the banned companies list? Take it up with my colleague, my friend, Dr. Amir Bsat. I'll argue with him against that. You know, if you're going to be, it's a legitimate thing to be concerned about the privacy and security of the data. It's another thing to jump to the conclusion that we should still rely on, paper and pencil and not use anything digital. Just as an example, if I can give you, yesterday I spent an hour and a half with a white hacker. One of the smartest people, exactly 20 years old, not even graduated from university. And in the hour and a half that he spent in my office using his own laptop, he cracked no less than 6 different departments. And in one of them, he could have given me access to the email exchange. This is a kid with no additional technology than what. So yes, our data is available.
This is exactly why.
But this is not exactly what you said. The Oracle deal is not about that. Let me go back to the case, the issue. Not enough investment has gone into protecting our data from beginning to end. And Alia, I take that very seriously, but I don't associate it with the political judgment on, Oracle supporting and contributing. These are political judgments. I have my views, you have your views, probably the same. But the point is, rather than mix the politics and our political views with a judgment on whether the country can be made safer and how to make it safer from a digital attack, I think, we're doing disservice to the interests of the Lebanese.
But that's why conversations like that are important. The simple question for people who are not into the technology, is there a way, and this is why the choice of Oracle or equivalent companies becomes relevant, because if there is a way to regulate, and I'm going to take that to you, Stephen, in a minute, you're the expert in technology. Do you think it's, realistically speaking, we can do that? You guarantee to the Lebanese citizen that their data, you're doing you're taking the best choice to protect their data.
Again, we are not signing with anyone at this point, not with Oracle, to be clear. I don't know if is that clear? حدا بعد عنده شك? Anything not clear? Okay, because Alia keeps saying, are you sure the data is safe?
I'm giving it as an example.
No, as an example.
Yeah.
But, we're the first ministry, the Office of the Minister of State. We've drafted the guidelines for cybersecurity and data privacy and circulated them to all the ministers so that all the ministries and departments follow the same rules to protect the data and to plan it in any investment they make in digital. So we take that very seriously. This is, if you will, the first thing that we have to do. And as to the choice of selecting the vendor, when we get to that, and we will be involved in these choices, we will have very strict guidelines to ensure that in no way the data can be compromised. Having said that, not all data is born equal, Not all data is data that is at risk. Let's be clear. There is high-risk data and low-risk data. We can complicate it even more, but high-risk data, you have to take additional measures to protect it. Low-risk data, it can be placed in data centers in other countries. And by the way, that's the case today. Our data is floating somewhere in the cloud, a lot of it, with no guidelines, with no proper oversight. And not only that, every single ministry, the administrator of that ministry is usually unknown. It's someone very low ranked, and if something goes wrong, or they could deliver the keys to the kingdom overnight, no one would know who did what. So all of this has to be organized, and literally we're starting from the bottom. We're starting from scratch.
This is a perfect segue, Stephen, to take it to you. Are there governance models that could inspire, or is power moving faster than regulation?
Yeah, thank you for the question, and it's really insightful to hear also the experience in Lebanon in terms of grappling with the difference between the push for innovation, but the need to have some sort of regulatory framework. I mean, I think the bottom line in terms of your question is that there aren't really much of anything when it comes to regulation. And I think there's a few factors behind that. I mean, certainly in the United States, politically, we're at, I would call it a deregulation moment. I think that we did see steps under the prior administration, under Biden, to begin to think about, at least in broad terms, ways to regulate data, ways to kind of think about protections when it comes to the use of different systems, AI safety, and so forth. What we've seen currently under President Trump is a step back, and that's been deliberate. It's really been an idea that let innovation flourish, see what happens as a result of that. That's almost a direct quote, I think. If and when there are problems that occur, only then you can react, but don't jump ahead of the innovation. And I think, there's a few different ways to think about it. I mean, on the one hand, it is fair to not put in place rules that are not future-proofed, where there's a risk that you are either regulating or legislating incorrectly or standing in the way of really important innovations that can transform things from economies to other types of institutional structures. On the other hand, operating in a vacuum, where basic safeguards, data privacy being a really important one, is something that isn't protected, where there aren't clear rules and there isn't accountability when it comes to the large tech companies that are doing very quick things, disruptive things at scale in ways that don't provide a lot of reliability when it comes to the consumer about what will happen and how the data will be protected. I think that, to me, raises concerns. And so, if I look around the world in any jurisdiction, whether it's, the European Union, which I think is sort of taking a step backwards at the moment, when it comes to those types of protections, certainly not, the United States is not doing much of anything. And frankly, there are some jurisdictions like China that actually have started to put in place some frameworks when it comes to protections, but they have large loopholes for national security that sort of, make that not particularly reliable. So I think the short answer is we're not there as a global community.
And how do you draw the line between that and democracy and freedom of speech?
Sure. I mean, I think, look, when it comes,
you gave the Chinese model here.
Yeah, I don't think the Chinese model is something that a lot of people subscribe to as a model that works outside of an authoritarian context. But I think what you're seeing, unfortunately, is a vacuum from the Democratic side, right? That I think between a lack of consensus about the right way to approach innovation, whether you should be slower, a little more methodical, and have that come at the expense of innovation, or whether you should race ahead and deal with the consequences later. I think there's a big debate and conversation right now where there isn't a clear consensus about which way to go. And because the U.S. has so much market power because of its companies, and because its viewpoint is less regulation and more innovation, that's, I think, is where you're seeing momentum shift to. What that means in terms of your question is then, unfortunately, the byproduct of that is certain important fundamental freedoms can get cast aside, at least for the moment, in favor of this technological innovation push.
well, yeah, I mean, less, more innovation, but here the innovation, there's a lack of trust in the tech companies based on the last 10 years. And there are serious concerns about the role that the tech companies are playing in the US.
Yeah, no, that's right, and I think you touched upon a good point. So, first of all, if we learn any lessons from, the social media giants and a lot of the negative spillover effects that have occurred, I think we ought to be wary about the motives, the profit motives that these companies have, and the type of safeguards that they are willing to provide when it comes to users. So that would be sort of point one. Point two is that some of these very same companies, Google has been mentioned, Meta is obviously a big player and so forth, are now very much in the vanguard when it comes to pushing out these large LLMs and these systems. And I would ask, especially as OpenAI, for example, tries to think about what is the profit model that we can use in order to keep funding our expansion. Oftentimes, that profit model will come at the expense of rights and of users. And so I think that in of itself should raise concern. I think the second issue that you mentioned as well is that there really is a power asymmetry, particularly when you see the large amount, the closeness in play when it comes to these sort of tech oligarchs and the Trump administration, and this sort of willingness to go along with their agenda, even if it comes at the cost of users. And that's not just American users, that's users worldwide. And so I think it is incumbent upon us to think about alternatives. And I think that the good thing is that we are not beholden to only follow the big tech giants. There is an emerging ecosystem of private respecting technology. They're not the largest players, but you can use open LLMs. You can work with a growing community of developers and software engineers who are putting in place different types of products that will be more rights respecting. And I would point to Signal as one of many different examples of where you can have a technology that doesn't have to rely upon the big tech giants in order to communicate, and that is being adopted more and more, including by U.S. government officials, to communicate in a secure fashion. So the idea that we are strictly beholden to the tech giants isn't necessarily true, even if many corporations would like you to think so.
It's very challenging, and I want to come back to that, and also to the issue of LLM when it comes to languages that are not necessarily just English. But before I do that, I want to talk about what AI means for at the level of security and military power. Ankit, I want to take it to you. And we've seen how spyware like Pegasus and Predator, introduced for security, were used against journalists and dissidents. And as AI enters intelligence systems, are we at risk of scaling and automating that model? Is the fear legitimate?
Yeah, so I would say that there's certainly a legitimate reason to be concerned about whether the diffusion of AI technologies around the world into everything from domestic security services to militaries enacting the use of force against other states will result in a world that is more primed for conflict. I think the fundamental question we have to ask, and I think the question that militaries and security organizations around the world are asking, is to what extent will AI successfully remove what we traditionally consider to be the fog and friction inherent in security operations, essentially the inability to have, for decision makers ultimately to have a sense of the environments in which they're operating, be that kind of overseas in the context of military operations against non-state groups and state groups alike, or within national borders. And I think we're beginning to see that the answers are not entirely all that clear cut. And at the same time, I think organizations, including militaries, will incorporate AI in a variety of applications. Some of these, I think, can be incredibly benign, right? Because I think our minds kind of go to some of the more worrisome applications, like, for instance, targeting, where decisions are being made on weapon systems being used. But you might also think about predictive maintenance of complex military systems, something right now that is done according to schedules, but you might have a sense of a number of sensors kind of feeding into an AI-enabled system that simply allows militaries to keep their maintenance up. So I think while the concerns are there, we need to be kind of sensitive to the precise applications of these technologies within large military and security organizations.
I want to take this back a little bit to what this means to us as individuals, as human beings. And Dr. Boulos, at both at the global and local levels, do you see how AI tools, do you see that AI tools, you see them more likely to buffer psychological stress or amplify it?
First, I love how I'm usually associated to the human aspect, as opposed to the rest. So thank you for your question, Alia. I would say both, right? Of course, in situations of crisis, of uncertainty specifically, AI can be an amplifier of stress. We know that fear is increased. Usually our nervous systems are overloaded, so we can see it as an amplifier, but at the same time, it can be used, and I think that His Excellency Dr. Shahade said it can be used as a stabilizing force as well. In different sectors, in my field, in the health sector specifically, it can help identify risk earlier. It can help reduce stigma in mental health, for instance. It can help alleviate the systems that are overcrowded or anywhere that don't have access to professionals where professionals are scarce for different reasons. And it does depend, of course, on intent, the intent of AI. It depends, of course, as well on governance. And as we were saying, ownership, I think, is key. If we only import AIs exactly the way they are, yes, it's going to increase the stress, most probably. But if we co-build AIs really by grounding them on our basis, on our realities, then again, this word stabilizing force is possible. And I insist on, and I think I'm going back to an idea of this real idea of co-building. Unfortunately, today, I do think personally that as Lebanon, we're not at the stage where we can do much on our own. And it's a lesson of humility that we should take and accept. And of course, who we partner with is important, but we can partner with different people at different times for different things. And I'm a partner of a fund. It's a fund called Globivest. It's the first life science fund in the region. And it's something that we've been stressing a lot on. Partnering first regionally with our neighbors, so it means the GCC on one hand, it means Europe, Mediterranean countries on the other hand, but it also means the diaspora, so across the globe. And for us, it is key if we want to increase qualitative ownership and to be part of the initiative, it is key to co-build today.
So the term co-build is relevant in the Lebanese context?
It is a personal point of view, but yes, I really, really think so. And it doesn't mean that potentially, eventually, at some point, we won't be able to build on our own. It means that exactly, if we're thinking, I hate the idea and the pressure, and I don't think it's, as you were saying, it's overrated to think of it as a race, but it is happening very fast. And if we want to participate, not just implement and import, then yes, for different reasons, we have to do it in partnership with.
I want to go back to the Lebanese context, but there's a segue. I want to take it to you, Stephen. When we talk about LLM, when we talk about the whole conversation between the AI companies today and publishers around the world, how once we move post the SEO era towards the AI era in terms of getting literature, what's happening in the region, most of the LLM is happening through tech companies in the Gulf countries, where not exactly very famous for democracy practice. Is this something we need to be careful with? Is this also part of a conversation happening anyway?
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good question. And, it also speaks back to a moment ago, we were talking a little bit about Chinese LLMs, many of which are world beating, but when you look at how they've been trained and you start looking at some of the censorship aspects that are built in, that ought to be cause for concern. Likewise, when you look at companies like G42 and its Falcon model, and you look at some of the underlying questions when it comes to different aspects that the UAE and Saudi and some of the other Gulf states have been associated with when it comes to digital repression, that ought to be cause for concern, because ultimately, AI is information. It is a portal, is a gateway to produce. It is a gateway to consume information increasingly. It is sort of the future in terms of where we're going. So to think for a second that governments won't be considering this carefully and saying, well, hold on, if this is a potential fount for resistance, if this is an area where our status quo viewpoint can be challenged, if this is a place where you can start to bring up dissent that later on can be something that is not controllable, that can sway governance, then we ought to find a way to control that. I think even if that's not something that's currently happening, I think most individuals and companies that are associated with states that are authoritarian will have that in the back of their minds, or will have a legal framework that will allow for manipulation of LMs and so forth. So I see this as definitely another battleground.
But here we're talking not only about how current affairs are going to be presented or the news, we're also talking about archives and history and access not only to new information, but also whatever is
what has happened in the past.
Right, and that's it's kind of rewriting history pretty much.
Yeah, no, exactly, and that's a good case in point. Something that I personally looked at is when you look at sort of DeepSeek's model, Chinese model, and you look at sort of questions about Tiananmen Square in the history, it presents a very sanitized version, sanitized is probably a kind word. It presents an alternate history of what occurred when it came to dissent, because the history of a country and its political culture is as relevant as in terms of what is produced subsequently. And so it's all part of the reshaping of narratives, or the censorship of narratives that present a viewpoint that challenges the state. And so I think in an authoritarian system where control is of the utmost importance, of course you're going to look at the newest future technologies and say, well, how does this fit into the governance framework that's in place in this country?
But that's in the English language, for example, the big publishers, the FT, the Wall Street Journal, are in conversation with the tech companies, with the AI companies in the LLM. This is outside of the English language. How is the data collection happening, like the information collection happening?
Yeah,
you mentioned G42. You mentioned.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm worried about
I think the short answer is we don't really know. I mean, it's very opaque right now, and that is something that I think we need to have greater transparency. How is the data being collected? To what extent are things changing? To what extent, how are models being trained? What kind of answers are being generated, and what does that mean for kind of future use and consumption? I mean, we're sort of at a moment right now where there is not a lot of clarity in terms of usage, where there's a lot of variability in terms of the deployment of these models, and so it's a very, the arena, the environment is very up and down right now.
Well, talking about risk, Ankit, I'm going to take it back to you. Where is the line between legitimate defense and AI-enabled repression most at risk?
So I think this is a complex topic, right? And I think it gets into the conversation around global norms around the diffusion and deployment of AI systems by militaries around the world. How will these systems kind of relate to traditional concerns around the law of armed conflict, around accountability, international humanitarian law? There's a number of, I think, big debates here. There are some issues that are, relatively kind of lower hanging in the realm of global norms around the diffusion of AI technologies. For instance, in the field where I spend most of my time, in the world of nuclear weapons, we are starting to see an emerging norm among many of the nuclear states that nuclear weapon systems and decision-making should be kept away from AI-enabled decision-making. But, there's still unresolved questions then about what exactly does it mean to have a so-called human in the loop. Are we completely cutting out so-called AI decision support systems, for instance, in the context of crises? So I think, to go back to kind of Stephen's answer, which I thought was very good. I think a lot of these similar questions about uncertainty, about precise applications, definitely also linger when we talk about the application of AI systems around the world, including by not just the kind of the large advanced militaries, the United States, the Chinas, and others, but increasingly, I think, smaller states. I think one of the big concerns that I think deserves more consideration in these debates is how AI military capabilities will begin to diffuse to smaller countries around the world, and the effects that will have on matters of war and peace more broadly, including in the Middle East.
Thank you. Dr. Boulos, I want to go back to you and to the Lebanese context. In your opinion, in a country like Lebanon, where information mostly is not good. People are exposed to a flow of bad information. What is that doing? And of course, it's going to be amplified with AI. What does that do to people?
Yeah. I like this question, and I always ask it for myself, but also across generations. There are differences across generations, depending on what crisis you went through or not. I think mostly we're going to witness oscillations between, on one hand, hypervigilance, but then on the other hand, emotional numbness, sort of. When you have, against the context of chronic crisis, when you have acute events, punctually like the 4th of August, for instance, 2020, of course, we're going to all be in a state of alert, right? But then we'll be reminded of our how we can't do much about it, and we'll go back to a sort of to being desensitized, sometimes to dissociating, or even to learned helplessness. And I think learned helplessness is one of the worst things that can happen at the collective scale. I mean, it's already sad enough on an individual scale, but sometimes you understand, someone, at the end of the day, what can one person do about something sometimes? But at a collective scale, there's always something we can do together. And I think it's important to keep in mind. So to maybe stay hypervigilant, even if it's tiring sometimes, and not let ourselves be emotionally numb.
Well, it's good to end on a positive note. I want to be conscious about time before I go on this last round. How much time do we still have? 7 minutes. So basically, I'm going to ask, I'm going to give everybody a last word, given the mixed feelings about the topic of AI. So I'll start with you, Stephen, and take it to the other guest, and we close with you, Mr. Shahade. Please.
Sure. Yeah. There's so much to say on this, and there's so many kind of ways to think about it. I mean, I think we're at a moment where there is a lot of experimentation taking place, and I think we have to be careful to balance our concern about where the technology will go and potential exploitation and bad uses, together with the recognition that there also are a lot of efficient, beneficial uses. And whether it's thinking about the context of war, where systems have been instrumental, frankly, in terms of helping smaller countries like Ukraine fight off larger aggressors like Russia, or thinking about the vast efficiency gains in areas like healthcare and others, where, or the provision of public services, where there is a real benefit when it comes to transparency and corruption that AI systems can bring that otherwise have been beset by old ways of thinking and old provision of services. I think there are a lot of really important uses that can take place. But I also think that we need to bear in mind the lessons that we should have learned and picked up from the use and incorporation of digital technology without a concurrent accountability structure in place, and that we need to sort of move, walk and chew gum at the same time. Keep moving ahead with innovation, building up sovereign LLM systems, but also bearing in mind that building up important protections for users, data privacy, and other regulatory approaches, not to mention privacy enhancing tech, is essential to where we're moving to in the future.
Ankit, would you like to give us your closing remarks, please?
Yes, absolutely. And I didn't say this at the start, but thank you for having me on this panel. And I'm sorry that I couldn't join you all in person in Beirut. So look, I think we've scratched the surface here of a really important set of issues. I mean, just kind of sticking to the domain in which I mostly work, kind of military and security issues. I think the thought I want to close with is really that, when we talk about the implications of artificial intelligence, we're having a conversation that really relates to more than 200 years of persistent changes with, how militaries around the world have reacted to new and disruptive technologies, right? When I go back to that example I offered about the potential and promise that AI technologies hold for militaries in seeing the fog and friction that's inherent in conflict and war to be somewhat reduced, we're essentially going back to the use of aerostatic balloons in the late 19th century to gain surveillance over battlefields, which was an important technological breakthrough at the time in terms of understanding and having sort of situational awareness. So at the same time, I think while we kind of recognize that this is a an endemic condition that I think militaries over the years have had to cope with. Technologies change, they introduce new promises for both attackers and defenders. I think it's also just important to be cognizant of the fact that much will depend on the ways in which AI systems are actually integrated into various militaries around the world, which depends on everything from civil military dynamics to bureaucratic politics to resourcing to the availability of actual real world sensors. In the military domain, you are talking still about the physical world. And so as much as you can do with software and algorithms, at the end of the day, you still will need the ability to actually gain data, to actually fuse and analyze with the use of AI-enabled systems. And so this is a conversation that I think needs to very much take place in terms of the context of how various militaries around the world, from Ukraine to the People's Liberation Army in China, to the U.S. military, to other smaller militaries around the world as well, are going to be looking to sort of incorporate these capabilities. So thank you again for this opportunity. It's been a great discussion.
Thank you. Dr. Boulos.
I think we said a lot of things about governance and ownership, and obviously AI has, like, we need to be careful, and it's obvious and it's been said. But then I think it's very important to always put it back in the box where it belongs. As a tool, it is a tool, and then a tool, you get excited about it. And maybe finishing on this note of how I get excited about AI specifically in our context in Lebanon. I come from a neuroscience background, and we have a very unique, unfortunately, an amazing ideal lab to study the impact, for instance, of chronic crisis on the brain. And we have a unique profile, cognitive, psychological profile. Most of us are going to be highly adaptive, but also chronically depleted, and we're not equal when facing crisis. Some of us are going to develop, psychiatric depression or PTSD or anxiety, and others are going to show resilience. And then there's so many interesting questions to ask there. Of course, what are the biomarkers of resilience? But also resilience, yes, but at what cost? For instance, those of us who are resilient, are we going to develop autoimmune diseases, other conditions? And this brings us to my last sentence, I guess, is how can we really, and it's what we're doing in our lab, how can we use AI to build multimodal approaches, not just for mental and brain health, but also to understand how we interact with our exposome. And here we have lessons, it can be useful solutions for Lebanon, but also across the globe, because we are moving in this very uncertain direction everywhere else as well.
Obviously, a lot to do. Your Excellency, having heard all those opinions, your closing remarks, please.
I think we've heard some warnings about the technology unregulated, which I fully agree with. I think just like Dr. Boulos, I come to technology from the angle both of adopting technology but also regulating it. So I'm very sensitive to these concerns. But we do face in this country a choice that I think will not be available to us for a while if we don't make the right choice today. And it is to fully embrace this technological revolution, bring it into the public sector, make sure that we have the right laws and regulations so that we can co-build, because today our laws do not encourage anyone to come and partner with us to co-build, say, in healthcare, in health tech, for example, and so on and so forth. But we do face these choices, and they're not just do we use AI or not. That's a simple one. Do we regulate or not? These are simple questions, frankly. Yeah, we use AI, we adopt it, we should embrace it. And yes, it has to be regulated to the extent that we can regulate it within one jurisdiction. But I think there are bigger issues that deserve a lot more consideration. One is about the ethical use of AI. I have today a team of colleagues working with so far 8, 9 universities, and they're meeting on a regular basis, discussing the different ethical issues related to the use of AI. And I say the ethical use of AI because I'm not at a stage as a society where I think we can start, legislating about AI. I'm very careful about that because, there are some ethical issues that need to be sorted out and then minimize the legislation and the regulation. So that's one issue. There is no clear-cut answer, and I think that's something that many of you may be following for the years to come. Another big issue has to do with the geopolitical dimension that is now governing technology. You know, when I started in graduate school, the first project I worked on was export controls, controlling the export of technology. And I find myself now, I'm not going to say how many years later, but now we're back to square one. This is still the issue today. It's back to being the issue after decades of, you know, complete laissez-faire approach to technology transfer. And countries, I'm not going to name these, but if anyone is interested, we can later talk about that. Many countries have faced this choice and had to choose between adopting American or Chinese technology. There is no European alternative, let's face it, in Europe. Europe has regulated itself out of this competition. Europe has a beautiful AI Act, but you know, when the AI Act requires the developer, every time they do an upgrade, to submit, to open up the black box and submit it to scrutiny to a committee of experts, that discourages people. And so there are so many issues about the EU AI Act that I find too onerous. The US has gone to the other extreme, which is to say, I don't care, I'm not going to regulate, I'm putting the, if you will, the preference on innovation. I'll think about regulation 10 years later. Today, this is an issue we still don't face, but we have to monitor what's happening, and other countries around us are experimenting, and we'll have to choose our own solution. Those are choices that we have to make. But I also think that we have to think about this, you know, very seriously, these choices about ethics, about regulate now or later, or regulate or not regulate, and 3, the geopolitical dimension. Those are huge, complex issues, but you know what? It doesn't mean we stop till we have perfect answers, because I don't think we'll have perfect answers. We should just embrace the technology, start using it carefully, keeping our North Star, which is to protect the data and protect the country, with our focus on how do we achieve prosperity and security, which I think remain, in a very simple way, our 2 most important objectives as Lebanese: security and prosperity.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all my guests, and thank you to the audience and to Grand Niki.